I'm Tom Scottis. I'm speaking with Alex Schadenberg of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. Alex, the Supreme Court of Canada effectively legalized doctor-assisted suicide on February 6th. Why do you oppose this decision?
Well, the Supreme Court of Canada decision went against the previous precedent of the case in 1993, which was the Rodriguez case. And that case dealt with very similar circumstances as the current case. So what you're having is a situation where they've struck down the law dealing with assisted suicide, and they've opened it up. But what's very concerning about this is that they've done it in such a way that they've made it very difficult for Parliament to come down with an effective law to protect people. What really needs to happen is Parliament needs to say to the Supreme Court, no, we will not accept this decision. And further to that, we also need time if we're going to craft a law which will effectively protect people. But basically, they need to go forward that notwithstanding clause. This is a very dangerous decision, and I'll give you a little bit of an idea why it's so dangerous. It's said that assisted suicide should be legal for people who have physical and psychological pain. Now, you might know a little bit about what's happened in other jurisdictions, but where they've allowed assisted suicide for psychological pain, that's where all those other cases which seem ridiculous have occurred. So, for instance, in Belgium, where the woman who was going deaf asked for assisted suicide, died by assisted suicide, even though she was completely physically healthy, it was because she said that she was going through psychological suffering. There's another case in Belgium of a woman who had anorexia, who was going to a psychiatrist to deal with her eating disorder, and the psychiatrist had sexually assaulted her. And in the complaint process, she said that the whole process of complaining about what happened to her was so great a level of psychological suffering that she wanted to die. And sure enough, they killed her. So when we're talking about psychological suffering, we're talking about a very serious concept to allow someone to be involved with killing you based on that basis alone.
Do you think the Supreme Court overstepped its jurisdiction?
Yeah, the Supreme Court definitely overstepped its jurisdiction. We have to understand that law is written by Parliament for a couple reasons. First of all, Parliament has the best is the best place to be able to discuss these issues. If there's going to be change on these strongly held view societal issues that affect all of us, it should be a situation where within a democracy we have an opportunity to all respond. But secondly, Parliament has decided to uphold our current laws. Parliament has debated this on 6 occasions since 1993. The last occasion was in 2010, where in April of 2010 there was a bill before Parliament to legalize euthanasia and assisted suicide, and it was defeated by 228 to 59. So Parliament has dealt with the question. Democracy has been working. People are saying it's not safe to do this. A lot of people have a fear of having a bad death, so they might say that they support assisted suicide or euthanasia, but they have strong caution about it. Parliament has recognized that, and Parliament has said, well, we will look at how we improve care, not how we kill people. The Supreme Court took it upon themselves to say to Parliament, we don't care what you've done, we're going to decide. And that is inappropriate. The Supreme Court has definitely gone beyond interpreting law and dealing with the constitutional questions to actually making law.
Does it alarm you that all 9 justices were in agreement?
Well, that did alarm us. We were wondering how that happened. It would be very interesting to be the fly on the wall to find out how that occurred. But secondly, I was more alarmed by the language of the decision. I already mentioned to you about psychological suffering. But this language of this decision is very, very wide. And we thought for sure that there was at least 2 members of the Supreme Court who were against it. And now to come up with a decision which was unanimous, but also with such wide language, is extremely concerning. And I wonder how that occurred and where that came from. Because the fact of it is that the law is designed to protect Canadians. Now, if they thought, because they claim that the law was overbearing, it was not necessary to protect Canadians with with a total prohibition, that was their argument. But to have that situation, but then to use such wide language to make it very difficult to come up with a law that will still protect Canadians, is completely irresponsible of the Supreme Court. In fact, the article that I wrote about it said that this was a very irresponsible and dangerous decision. I will say one other thing which was very, very upsetting and confusing why a Supreme Court would say this. They decided that the right to life, which is Section 1 of our Constitution, the right to life, that actually guaranteed assisted suicide.
Oh boy.
That is a funny situation because in fact the opposite is the truth. But what they said in their convoluted argument was that assisted suicide, some people who want to kill themselves will do so early because assisted suicide is illegal. They'll do so early because they're still capable of doing it. So therefore, if we legalize this, that in fact is going to allow them to wait until the last moment because somebody else can be directly involved and it's still possible to do it. But that assumes something. It assumes, first of all, that the right to life also allows a right to death, meaning a death by suicide. And it doesn't. They did not even go that far. So they're writing into the Constitution brand new ideas that are very dangerous and disconcerting. And if you think about it further, as dangerous as this is, that language, if not checked by Parliament, if Parliament doesn't check this, does not challenge this sort of language, could lead to serious, serious abuses in our country.
Is there any hope now that this decision can be overturned by the court or that Parliament can act to keep euthanasia illegal?
This decision on assisted suicide could be overturned by the court, but not for a very, very long time. That is the reality, because obviously you would need to replace all 9 members of the Supreme Court, or at least 5 of the 9, with members who are not so activist. And that is very, very difficult to actually imagine happening. I'm also very concerned with the just simple mentality of the Supreme Court, where they've completely separated themselves from decisions that are connected to reality to come up with these new and absurd legal concepts that they're forcing into our system. And that's really what it is about. It's about coming up with new concepts, new ideologies that are very dangerous that will then go further from here to be exploited. Very, very, very dangerous. And I'm hoping that, I'm really hoping that other courts in other nations don't start looking at this thinking that this is acceptable, because that means other nations will receive that same sort of cancer that seems to be being imposed upon us with bad legal decisions.
Do you believe the court's assurances that safeguards can protect the most vulnerable people from abuse?
Safeguards will not protect vulnerable people from abuse. And so what we've seen in other jurisdictions, and a prime example would be the Netherlands and Belgium, but what we've seen in other jurisdictions is that it starts out somewhat tight, meaning that the doctors don't just do this. And then over time, certain doctors do things which, would be considered unacceptable at first, but because it's been over time and people become more accepting of it, they do these things, and that just happens and is accepted, and before you know it, that becomes common and acceptable, and it expands and expands. So what you have, for instance, in Belgium is a lot of crazy cases going on. For instance, there's been some really weird ones. For instance, the man in Belgium who had a sex change operation was unhappy with the sex change operation. He wasn't physically ill. He wasn't. There's no diseases here. He just said that how he looked was too great a level of psychological suffering, and he died by lethal injection. So when you start thinking about these things, the problem with this decision is, unless it's checked by Parliament, it actually opens the door to all these things because the language was so wide. I was very disturbed by that they did not recognize the importance of protecting Canadians. Considering the issue of people with disabilities, it totally rejected those arguments, and it was foolish of them. People with disabilities in our country, and the disability community is fairly united on this issue, meaning that they say, we are not treated with equality in Canada. They recognize that there's an ingrained level of discrimination that exists towards people with disabilities, whether we want to admit it or not. And in that situation, they're saying, if you legalize assisted suicide, you're actually giving the power to a doctor to not kill us. That is just simply not safe. So to suggest these people don't need protections in law is in fact very naive.
Now that doctor-assisted suicide has been legalized, what will the future strategy of your organization be?
Okay, so the law does not come into place for at least 12 months. So, I mean, the situation is very disconcerting at the moment, because how do we attain some sort of situation which will be able to be used to be able to go further to create protections for Canadians? The first thing is we're asking for the notwithstanding clause. And the reason for that is very clear. A, we think the court decision is simply wrong. But secondly, and it's dangerous, but secondly, even if Parliament is to craft a law, that will take time. And the time was not in their, they don't have a lot of time. The Supreme Court gave them 12 months, and yet we know that there's going to be an election in October. So is there time to get a piece of legislation through which is written in an effective manner before the election in October? And the answer is no. There's not time. Not enough parliamentary time to do that. Then the next question is, okay, would there be time after the election to get a bill through which is properly written, effectively written, to protect Canadians, and have it done so before the 12-month time is up? And the answer is no, it's not possible. So, you know, in fact, the Supreme Court, by doing it this way, has created a situation where they have almost placed Parliament in a jeopardy situation. We can't do this, it's simply not possible, but we're told we have to do it. I'm saying to people that they have to stand up and say no. This is the time in the culture where we recognize that it's important for how we care for people. You know, euthanasia, assisted suicide, it threatens a lot of people, but the greatest threat is to people who are alone and lonely, who are not cared for, and who are not being treated with respect and dignity. And you know, people of faith, people who truly care about others, need to recognize that it's time simply to say no to the culture, but also time to say, I will get out of my comfortable location and help the other, be with the other, and care about the other. That truly, truly will be a rejection of euthanasia and assisted suicide.
And thank you for your work, and God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.